What's up, guys? Let's take a trip down memory lane. I want you guys to think about the first day of school, specifically when you guys were entering a new school and a new grade. For high schoolers, I want you guys to think of the night before the very first day of freshman year. For junior hires, I want you guys to think about the night before the very first day of 7th grade. For both grades, I'm sure you guys felt similar emotions. You guys were scared, probably nervous, probably couldn't sleep the night before. All of those emotions, I'm sure you guys have both felt. And I know for me, when I was entering those grades, I felt the same exact way. I was especially scared entering freshman year just because of how different I knew things were going to be. It gave me a taste of independence. It gave me a taste of what independence looked like, not from my own perspective, but through other people. And obviously, you don't get too many options as a freshman, but you're also sharing the school with people who are making those big life decisions and who are as independent as they want to be. Decisions like what college they're going to pick, what career path they'll choose, you name it. And from looking at that as a freshman, it helped me realize that there's gonna come a point in my own life where I'm gonna have to make those same exact decisions for myself. And I think deep down, that's what scared me the most. And just like how you would switch schools because of grade levels and things that were completely different, I knew after graduating, those feelings would come right back again. Those feelings of being scared or being nervous. And I knew after graduating, it would be a turning point in my life. And whether it was good or bad, I wasn't sure because obviously I don't know the future. But these past few weeks, we've been talking all about things that grow our faith, like Rich mentioned during worship. Things that make our faith that go from counterfeit, just a copy, to something real and personal to us. We've been talking all about how our faith can shift from being an imitation of someone else's to bring something that we own ourselves. And maybe more than anything else, turning points in life do just that. Chances are you've had a few turning points in your life already. These are the moments that turn our lives around and set us in a direction we weren't going before. Sometimes they can be really positive things like your first place in Battle Royale. I'm sure people would kind of go crazy from that, but exactly. Or they can be something like your sports team winning for the first time. Other times, it can be a neutral turning point where it's not great, but it's not really too bad either. I guess a perfect example would be if you get a C+ on like a paper or something. A C+ isn't amazing, but it's not bad. It's something I like to call C's get degrees, and whoever has graduated college, that's pretty real. But there are other times where it can be a lot more negative. I guess you can say negative turning point that you can experience too. I remember right after high school, my mom and dad were actually struggling to pay their bills, all the way to the point where we got evicted. And for those who don't know what an eviction is, it's actually where somebody is not able to pay their rent. So the landlord or the person who owns the property kicks the person out. And that happened to us. It was crazy when it happened because I never would have expected us to be in that position, but we were, and that was a negative turning point for me. And luckily for my brothers, they had found a place that they could stay with their friends, and stay there for about 3 months or so until we found a place. But for me and my parents, we weren't so lucky, and we actually rented out a motel for about 3 months. And from that moment forward, my entire family, all 5 of us, never lived in the same house again. And I'm not saying this for you guys to feel bad for me or anything like that. I'm not trying to gloat over how poor I was and here I am now, I'm still broke. But yeah, that's not what I'm trying to do. I tell you guys that story because I want to tell you guys that I can relate. And I'm sure everybody in this room has a similar negative turning point in their life where they can relate to. Some may even describe their negative turning point as as a horrible turning point because of what they went through. And I'm sure you guys in junior high or high school have probably similar negative turning points as well. And examples could be maybe your best friend moved to another state, maybe you moved to another state. It could be your family member passing away, or something like you were injured during a football season and you can't really play anymore. These are just a few examples, but really think about a negative turning point in you guys' own life and experience that just in this night, and really think about that while I'm kind of preaching this message. But that's really where I want to spend tonight. I want to spend some time talking about those sort of turning points. And generally, negative turning points are often difficult times that challenge us and make life just hard. But what do they do to our faith? Tough times like these have the power to build our faith or completely destroy it. These are defining moments, especially when you keep having faith, even when it's difficult. Times when it seemed like God was really far away, but ended up being much closer than you thought. You're able to look back and say from that moment, from the perseverance, God, I no longer see you as somebody that's just on Sundays I'm learning about, but you're more real, more personal to me in my personal walk because of this situation. One of the best illustrations of this type of turning point that changed someone's faith comes from the life of Jesus. It's described by one of his friends and disciples, John, who wrote all of this, and John writes this. In John 11:1, it says, "Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Mary. These three, Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, weren't just random people that stumbled upon Jesus. They were close friends with Jesus. So after Lazarus got sick, Martha and Mary reached out. And John 11:3 says this, the sisters sent word to Jesus. They sent a messenger to find Jesus, who was 2, 3, or even 4 days away by travel on foot. Their message said, Lord, the one you love is sick. In other words, they didn't even have to mention his name, Lazarus' name. They knew that Jesus automatically knew who that person was and who the messenger was talking about. Mary and Martha knew Jesus had healed many people, including strangers. So of course, when Lazarus became sick with a life-threatening illness, they called on Jesus to show up. But things didn't really go exactly as Martha and Mary, even Lazarus has planned. Jesus not only didn't leave to go to their house after staying 2 days where he was at, but where he needed to go was about an eight hour away walk. So about a day's trip. So this would be a total of about 3 days without helping Lazarus. And by the time he got there, he was obviously super dead. It was 3 days. But that was the worst kind of turning point you can imagine. So you can only imagine how Martha and Mary were feeling like when Jesus shows up 3 days after Lazarus is dead. After Martha sees Jesus, 3 days later, she says this, Lord, Martha says to Jesus, if you had been there, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. And imagine being in Martha's position right now. She had lost her brother, she's angry, she's sad, she's probably confused. She's wondering why Jesus hadn't been there when she needed him the most. But even after saying all of that, she says something that continues her trust in who Jesus was. And that's what turning points do for us. Positive or negative, they sharpen our focus. They get our attention. They force us to ask ourselves hard questions like, what do I really think God is like? Because it's easy for us to think that God is this compassionate, kind, merciful, good being when everything is perfect. But the challenging part is, do you still think he's good when things aren't going so well? When you have the negative turning points that we really talked about earlier. Another way to put it is this. When things don't go as planned, when things take a turn for the worst, what do I believe about God? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves even daily. You don't have to wait until tragedy strikes you or your family to think about these things. But make it a practice to continually ask yourself these questions to evaluate where you're at spiritually. So when you do face tragedy, you will hold on to the truth that you kind of recite yourself daily, like your life depended on it. Martha, on the worst day of her life, in the worst pain that she'd known that she went through, experienced Jesus being present with her. And Jesus responds this way. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again, Martha." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." But Jesus said, "No, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, and even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" Martha responds, "Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." Martha believed. She trusted in Jesus even though her brother died. Jesus didn't show up in a time to save her brother, but her trust in Jesus was still very real. John tells us that after this, that Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how we loved him?" In that moment, Jesus felt exactly what we feel when we mourn and our hopes are shattered. Jesus gets our pain. John telling us Jesus wept is not just a fun little detail that he wanted to sprinkle in there, but it's a sign that we are never alone in our hurt. As bad as things get, Jesus is with us, and he will always be with us. He experiences it alongside us. When a turning point gets our attention, we will always find Jesus in the middle of it with us. At the hardest part of the story, when hope seems lost, he's there. After Jesus weeps, he does something after he weeps that was wild. And I'm sure all of you guys know this if you guys know the Lazarus story. But he asked Martha and Mary if they'd have their servants remove the stone covering of Lazarus' grave. But at this point, Lazarus was dead. Like, he was dead for about 3 or 4 days. So Jesus requesting this from Mary and Martha's servants is a pretty weird one, to be honest. But they did as Jesus asked, and they removed the stone from the tomb. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." I don't know if I've ever heard of a bigger mic drop moment than that one, but that's crazy. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and the story basically ends with this. Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. Just praise God. But it would be easy to read this story and think that the point is the happy ending. Lazarus, come back, the end. And it would be tempting to think that maybe that's what Jesus will do in all of our negative turning points. And maybe that's what makes it real faith, when Jesus shows up and makes the impossible possible. But we've all had moments where we've waited and we've prayed and we've hoped, we've begged for God to do something and he didn't, for him to do the impossible at times. So what then, when we feel like Jesus didn't show up? What does that mean for our faith? That's when we remember what Jesus did before he raised Lazarus from the dead. He wept. He was with Mary and with Martha in their pain alongside them before the miracle, before the resurrection, before any of them had an idea of the happy ending of what it's going to look like. He was there on their worst day. And he was there when the worst day became the best day, when Lazarus was raised from the dead. The same is true for us. No matter what kind of turning point we are facing, whether it's positive or negative or whatever, Jesus is with us. If things get better or things get worse, Jesus is there. And when we realize that, it's what grows our faith. Not that we always get the thing that we want, but we realize no matter what happens, Jesus is with us and for us. That makes for real faith and not a counterfeit one. Our pain doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be a part of the story, but not the point. It can get our attention, but it doesn't have to destroy our faith. It can even make us move closer to God. In fact, that's exactly what this story shows us. It's possible for our faith to grow, for God to seem more real than ever for us, to see God more clearly in our painful turning point. It's possible to go through the toughest pain possible and come through it trusting God more. Not because God made it go away, but because God uses it to stretch you, grow you, and make your faith more real and personal for you. And when that happens, people around us will see God in a much bigger way. Just like people surrounded Mary and Martha, it will make God more obvious to them. They will see that your faith is authentic and not counterfeit. And as a result, maybe you'll choose to trust God more because of that. The truth is, you're going to hit some negative turning points and positive turning points in your life. You've probably already hit a few, and I'm probably hitting a few right now too, so I'm right there with you. But you're likely to experience a lot more. And every time you do, you'll be tempted to lean away from God, to wonder where God is, or if God even cares. You may be tempted to think maybe your faith is counterfeit because things just didn't turn out the way you wanted. But the truth is, the story of Martha and Mary and Lazarus tells us that no matter what we are facing, the worst day or the best day, Jesus is there. And when we believe that and experience that, it grows our faith. In fact, it can make your faith even more authentic than ever. It may not feel like it when you're in the middle of it. It may feel like the opposite. But a turning point doesn't last forever. And it's possible that when you come out of the other side, you have a greater faith than you could have ever imagined. Even more, your story of getting through to the other side could be used to grow an authentic faith in someone else's life. Your story of how Jesus was with you, even when it was difficult, even when it felt like the opposite. That could be the thing that inspires somebody else's faith to go to another level. So when you are facing turning points, ask yourself these questions. And if you're taking notes, I highly encourage you to write these questions just to ponder it in your everyday life. The first question is, where is God in this? Maybe it feels like nowhere because the things are difficult and not getting faster. But try looking a little closer. Maybe God isn't the friend who texted you out of the blue to see how you were doing because they know that particular situation. Maybe God is in that encouragement from your coach or even group leader. Maybe God is in the world outside your front door that you slow down to notice on a walk. How the trees looked better, how the sun was shining, just things to be grateful for. Look for God because God is always there. The second question is, how can this tough situation help my faith grow? Remember, this turning point isn't forever. And when it's done, it's possible that you can look back and see how your faith is becoming more real because of it. You can look back and see how your faith became more real. And maybe not yet, maybe not right now, but eventually, even the hardest things can become things that can cause growth. Because God can use turning points to grow our faith. The truth is, nobody signs up for these tough times. And I want you to know that. Even on the days that faith doesn't feel real, if you stay close and choose to hold on to the faith that you do have, you will find that God stays close too. God is always faithful. God can use your tough times, as painful as they are, to make your faith more real, so that the next time you do face a difficult situation, you're even more stronger and even more sure and even more confident that God is real and can be trusted. Group is a great place to talk about all of this, all these questions that you have, because sometimes we need to hear other people's stories and they need to hear ours to know that we can make it through tough times together. We need to hear from each other and encourage each other so we can remember that God is real and trustworthy, even when it feels like the opposite is true. Remember that God can use turning points to grow our faith. And the truth is, nobody signs up for this tough time, like I said. Not one of us want that at all. But we all know eventually it's going to happen. That's just life. Not because God is angry or mean, but because we live in a world where really hard things happen to almost everybody. And I'm sure all of you guys have a little example of that in your own lives. It's a part of life. And when tough times happen, our faith can feel like a fairy tale or a fortress. It can feel completely made up or fake, And it feels like the only strong thing that's happening in our lives is our faith sometimes. It can be a place we give up on existing, or the place we run to that makes us feel the most safe. Depending on the day, like I said, it may feel like a little bit of both. And I just want to encourage you guys that the turning point is not your life, and it's only temporary. And I encourage you guys to just be as vulnerable as possible with group, just because that's where you can grow the most, when you are vulnerable. That's about it. But just remember, real faith grows when you're vulnerable and you trust in God to, even when it's hard to do that. I'll go ahead and pray, and then Rich will have some announcements of the challenge. Dearly Father, thank you for this wonderful time you've given us, Lord. Allow us to view our negative turning points not as the end of the world, but a way that we can grow our faith in a much deeper and more mature way, Lord. I pray that we can all get something out of this message, Lord, and we can apply it to our lives so we can look more like you, Jesus. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.